Hi, welcome to another episode, and today I'm sharing with you some things to watch out for if you're planning on renting a home here in Italy. Because when I first rented a home here nearly 3 years ago, it was a very different process to what I had been used to back in the UK. And so I want to share some of my own personal insights to help you if you are planning on moving to Italy and you are considering renting a home to begin your expat journey. So let's get into it, shall we? So I would say, first of all, I really agree with renting to begin with, because I think, especially if it is your first time in another country and you are just getting a feel for things, you don't want to immediately purchase a property in case you don't like the area or you decide you don't want to stay in that country. I feel like purchasing a property is a more permanent decision, and I think is no harm at all in trying before you buy, if you like, homes in different parts and regions of Italy, just to be fully sure of what you want to do before you decide to put down some permanent roots. So yes, I'm a big fan of renting. I think it's a great way to get to know a location and to be sure of your decision before buying a property. But one thing I will say is that typically Italians are very cautious when it comes to renting out their homes, and they have a very good reason to be, because there is a bit of a history here in this country of people not being able to pay or refusing to pay the rent once they have moved into a property. And then it's a very complicated and lengthy process to evict them from the home. And so for this, there is a bit more of a procedure when you want to rent a home here. So it helps if you are recommended by somebody, or you have a good job or good credentials to help them to be a little bit more trusting in you. So that's the first thing that I would say. Just be aware of this, because it is not just because you're an expat, but just generally speaking, Italians are very nervous when it comes to renting out their homes because of this situation. So the first thing that I want to point out to you that you need to be aware of is that the contracts here are different when it comes to rental agreements. Now, I used to rent a property back in the UK, and typically you would have a lease for maybe a year at a time. Whereas here in Italy, it is more common, if you don't have a transitory lease, which is a short-term lease, then you tend to have a more long-term lease. Now, these are often called 4x4 or 3x3, and what that means is it's a 4-year contract, and you have the option to renew for another 4 years on top. And if you renew, typically the rent that you originally agreed remains the same for the next 4 years of your contract, or 3 years and 3 years if that is your contract term. So obviously I found that a little bit different, because I've never known of a domestic property in the UK, a residential property, that would immediately be given a 4-year lease or a 3-year lease. Typically a year at a time is common, and then you have the option to renew every year. So of course I think there are some benefits to this, especially because your rent is fixed for that length of time, so you don't have to worry about rent increases every year. And also it gives you a bit of stability as well. If you're planning on settling here in Italy and you are sure that you don't want to be consistently moving around from town to town, then to know you are settled and have a permanent, a long-term residential contract can help you to feel a bit more secure and help you to put some roots down in a location. So there are positive benefits to it. Now, of course, you're not completely fixed in. You can break that contract early, but generally speaking, you have a longer break clause period. So typically maybe 3 or 4 months notice you have to give if you want to break a long-term contract like that. So just be aware of this. Of course, there are other options for you as well. You can rent a room in an apartment. This is a very common option for people here in Italy. It's obviously a lot cheaper. The bills are all split between the roommates, and generally speaking, it's a lot simpler to obtain as well, because the contracts maybe are just for a few months at a time. sometimes for a year. And of course, sometimes you have the ability to renew them as well. But just be careful, because some of these contracts are considered transitory and you cannot always obtain your residency with them. So if your plan is to move to Italy and to obtain a residency status, then you need to be very careful of the type of contract you get for your home, because as I've said before, some transitory contracts, they are not for residency purposes. So you just need to check with the owner or with the estate agents when you are looking that the contract for that particular property would support a residency application. This is really important because I don't think many people are aware of this, and it could potentially mean you get involved in a property that isn't going to meet your needs. So make sure this is one of the first things that you check when you are looking at properties. The next thing as well that I want to talk about and make you aware of is the different conditions that you'll find rental properties here in Italy. Now in the UK, when a property is rented, even if it is unfurnished, that means without tables and chairs and washing machines, you will always find a fitted kitchen and a fitted bathroom. And of course, all the light fittings and fixtures as well. Imagine my surprise when I started to view rental properties here in Italy to find that there were no kitchen fixtures or fittings and no bathroom fixtures or fittings in many of the apartments that I viewed. Now, I was like completely gobsmacked, but this is apparently a very normal thing in Italy. People tend to buy their own kitchen units and fitted appliances and bathroom units and fitted appliances and literally remove them and fit them again in every home that they may move to. Now, I'm like, why would I want to pay to have a beautiful kitchen fitted or a beautiful bathroom fitted if it is not my property? Like, this is something I cannot get my head around. And it's not something that I really agree with either. I feel like that sort of expenditure is when you buy your home, not when you rent somewhere. But just be aware that this is a very common feature when you are looking at rented properties here in Italy. And if you are lucky to come by a place that has a fitted kitchen or bathroom, snap it up, because they don't tend to sit on the market for very long. You may also find some properties that are furnished, but again, they don't tend to stick around for very long because they are not a common feature. And so people tend to snap them up if they become available. So just be aware of this. It is a very different condition that you will rent a property in here in Italy compared certainly to the UK and I think to many other countries as well. The next thing that I want to just bring your attention to when it comes to renting a property here in Italy is the different responsibility you will have as a tenant. Now, typically in the UK, when you rent a residential property, if anything goes wrong with the property, like maybe plumbing or electricity or something that is out of your control, the estate agency or the landlord themselves will be responsible for maintaining it for you. But in Italy, this is not always the case. Often that responsibility passes to the tenant. So it's really important that you check your contract, and especially if you don't speak the language, you have it either translated or you have somebody with you who can help you to understand what your responsibilities are as a tenant. Because I have heard of many horror stories from fellow expats who have rented accommodation and had some major problems go wrong with it to do with plumbing or electricity, and they have been the ones that have been left to forfeit the bill to get it fixed and repaired. So I think it's very rare for you to come across a property here in Italy that is rented where the landlord will take responsibility if things go wrong. So you need to be prepared for that. Make sure you check your responsibilities, make sure that you are happy with them before you sign on that all-important dotted line, because it is very common here in Italy that the tenant will bear the majority of the responsibility for the upkeep and maintenance of the property. And, you know, that can come as a bit of a shock, especially if the property you are renting is older. There may be more complications. So this is definitely something to consider when you are renting a property here in Italy. And another thing that I want to draw your attention to are the utility bills here. Now, obviously, as is in the UK and I'm sure other countries, you have to take out the utility bills in your name for the majority of the places you live in. If you share accommodation, like a room in an apartment, then obviously the bill will normally be in the landlord's name and then it's split between all of the roommates. But if you have an apartment solely to yourself, then you will need to open up accounts with gas, electricity, water in your name. Now be prepared, they all charge an activation fee, and this can vary, but it does all add up. So add this into your initial budget. It's not free to open an account. They will charge you an activation fee for the privilege of doing so. And also bear in mind that we don't have like a separate TV license here in Italy. So in the UK, you have your separate TV license you have to pay every year or every quarter. Here in Italy, it's included in your electricity bill. So you do pay a percentage toward the TV network, but it's through your electricity bill that you do this. Also, as well, bear in mind that you may have fees to pay in addition to your rent to do with the maintenance of the building you're in. Now, typically, the vast majority of properties here in Italy are apartment style buildings in blocks of flats. So, of course, the communal areas like the stairwells, the lifts, they are all professionally cleaned by cleaning companies. That's one thing that I really do love about Italy, is they take pride in their homes and in the places where they reside. And so for this, there is a fee that every person who has an apartment in the building has to pay to contribute towards for the cost of maintenance and cleaning of the communal spaces. So bear in mind that may not, and generally usually isn't, included in your rent. It may be different if you rent a room. Sometimes that fee is included. So bear that in mind when you're budgeting, because this is an additional cost that sometimes can throw people. And the cost can vary. Sometimes it's as little as 30 euros extra a month. Sometimes it could be much as like 100 euros. It all depends on your building and on like the companies that they use to maintain it. So just bear that in mind. But these are like some of the main points that I wanted to raise with you today when it comes to renting a property here in Italy, because it is a completely different process. And I think these are like the key things that I would say to be aware of from the very beginning, so that you are at least a little bit more prepared. Obviously, things differ from region to region, but these are my own personal experiences here in the south of Italy compared to what I'm used to back in London. So I hope that they have helped you. If you like my videos and are enjoying my channel, I would really appreciate it if you would subscribe and have a look at some of my other videos that I've posted here as well. They're all about life as an expat and ways to help you adjust to life in Italy and life abroad in general. So I will see you next time.